Hello, and welcome to Show Me History. I'm your host, Amy Blankenship. Before we begin today's episode, I feel that I need to issue a fair dues warning. As I started researching the Social Evil Hospital, it just rabbit-holed into the topic of, let's just say women of ill repute. This episode contains adult subject matter and may not be suitable for all ages. So if you listen to this with kids around, screen it first. My apologies. I suppose I was kind of naive in setting out my research on this episode. So, on we go. Dubbed the St. Louis Experiment, the Social Evil Hospital was the first of its kind in the United States. As part of a global social hygiene movement, the Social Evil Hospital and the ordinance that created it were groundbreaking ideas for their time. St. Louis in 1870 was kind of a wild and wicked place. With a population of 235,000, there were 5,000 prostitutes. So that's one female available for service for every 23 males of age. Venereal diseases were on the rise. In 1869, it was reported that the city had 135 plus cases of gonorrhea and syphilis per 100,000 members of the population. The Missouri Republican newspaper had something to say about the topic. Quote, "There has been sin in the universe ever since Satan tore heaven asunder and hell was born. And hand to hand with sin, down through the aisle of time, both in sacred and profane history, has stalked the Scarlet Woman. At once man's creation, man's sorrow, and man's curse." Unquote. The locations of the brothels were an issue within this social evil. The far ends of the levee, Almond and Poplar Streets, Christie Avenue, and Morgan Street, were full of adverse establishments. Brothels attracted a certain type of undesirables in the neighborhood. Madams had the funds to outbid families on properties, including houses in what were considered good areas of the city. An article in the St. Louis Democrat stated, quote, "Everyone who knows anything about the city is aware of the fact that a very large proportion of the upper stories on 4th Street from Chestnut to Locust are occupied by gamblers, while women of bad repute monopolize whole blocks in the very heart of the city. Green Street from 3rd to 10th, Market from 3rd to 11th, 10th Street from Clark to Chestnut, Almond, Poplar, and Spruce Streets from Main to 4th are the chosen habitations of women of the town." Unquote. People feared it would take over the city, and citizens urged the city government to do something about the growing problem. City Health Officer William Barrett made a plea to regulate the social evil. It was destroying the health and vigor of a large portion of our inhabitants and tainting their blood with eradicable poison. Back in 1858, William Sanger, a prominent doctor in New York, published a study advocating that the United States use a system similar to Paris, where they regulated and medically inspected prostitutes to decrease the spread of disease. William Barrett was a proponent of this philosophy, and in his 1870 annual report, he cited much of Sanger's work in his presentation to the city government. The city sought to control this issue through policy. If they could not eradicate the problem, they could attempt to regulate it. So, St. Louis became the first city in the nation to legalize prostitution. A provision in the city's charter approved by state legislators allowed St. Louis to either suppress or regulate prostitution. In July of 1870, the Board of Aldermen passed the Social Evil Ordinance with a vote of 16 to 5. The Social Evil Ordinance legalized prostitution within restrictions. All women were to register. Registration, women were required to choose one of 3 classes. The first being a kept woman of a long-term contract with one man. Second category, inmates of brothels or madams. And the third would be individual women operating out of a single room. When registering, women had to provide their name, any aliases, a permanent address, age, and other occupation if it was applicable. Any changes of address had to be reported to the Board of Health. The only way to be removed from the registration list was to move to another city, legally agree and a vow to leave the profession, or to die. Registered women and madams had to pay fees to the Board of Health. There's a monthly tax levy on brothels. The city was divided into 6 districts by ward. Each district was assigned a physician to examine registered women on a weekly basis. Women who passed their exam were given a certificate of health and permission to carry out their business. Women failing were forced to report to the hospital within 24 hours for further evaluation and treatment. Initially, these women were sent to the city hospital, but this wasn't the best idea. Other patients complained of having to share quarters with low-class women and ladies of ill repute. It was also noted that these ladies got a little too friendly with the male staff members. The ordinance also regulated the location of brothels. The city government could decide whether to approve or deny the moving of a brothel to a new location. It also gave police the permission to survey establishments as they pleased and issued fines and arrest people as they deemed necessary. Doors of brothels were to be kept unlocked and available for inspection at all times. Initially, the press praised the city for the ordinance. An article in the Missouri Republican newspaper stated, "If the evil cannot be suppressed, the wisest course of action is to regulate within proper bounds," unquote. St. Louis was called a model city in legislation in its attempt to control a social evil. Within the first 8 months, 1,284 women working for establishments and 243 individuals registered. There were 136 brothels and 9 houses on the books to be taxed. In the fall of 1872, the Social Evil Hospital opened. The hospital was located at the corner of Arsenal and Sublette, about 4 miles outside the city limits at that time. It was near the city's poorhouse and farm, as well as the insane asylum. So let's just keep all those outcasts together outside the city limits, right? Costing over $100,000 to construct, it was a tall brick building on 11 acres of land. Its operation and construction were funded by the fees and licenses collected from the madams and individual prostitutes. The hospital treated all types of conditions, treatments of STDs, mental illness, addictions, pregnancy, and childbirth, as well as everyday maladies. The circumstances of the hospital were not ideal for its patients. There were several people who were assigned to a room with bunk beds. They were under watch and always guarded, and no one was permitted to leave until they were deemed cleared by a physician. Now, this is just kind of a Amy side rant. I'm curious how when patients were deemed free of their venereal disease. So the only proven cure for syphilis is penicillin, and it wasn't discovered in 1928, and not until 1943 that it was used to treat syphilis. And gonorrhea is treated with sulfa drugs, and they didn't come along to the 1940s. So I'm assuming, like everything else during that time period, we probably just treated those ladies with some kind of combination of mercury and arsenic. So also on the campus of the hospital was a house of industry. Here, women were urged to leave their profession and find a more suitable lifestyle. They received lectures from reformers, and an attempt was made to teach them valuable skills to obtain a job in a different career path. The house of industry lasted a short while as most women did not profit from its services. And the ordinance proved very difficult to administer. By 1874, the law was falling apart. Very few brothels and individuals were registered, given the entire population of the industry. The system was corrupt from within. Women had certificates of health but were never examined. One woman was found to have a certification dated 3 weeks in advance. The doctors assigned to assist with this requirement of the ordinance had a very heavy caseload. There was only 6 physicians to attend to weekly examinations of thousands of women. So they began issuing the certificates and collecting fees, but not actually conducting any medical examinations. And the system was never really successful and began to unravel in just a few weeks after implementation. So it was an administrative nightmare to track all of these ladies, get them registered, and constant address changes. By the end, registration had fallen by 45%. And of course, the citizens of St. Louis had quite a bit to say about the situation. Supporters for the cause said the ordinance created sufficient revenue for the city. A successful madam would pay a monthly tax levy of $2,500. That's $30,000 in today's money. Others claimed it was a necessary evil of society that just accompanied city life. They claimed that without access to prostitutes, men would seduce and rape women. Some doctors believed that prolonged absence from sex would lead to physiological disorders and insanity in men. So despite these brilliant medical claims, resistance to the ordinance began to grow. Women's organizations argued it was discriminating against women. Men of the same business were not required to register and pay fees. It was a violation of basic human rights to have to undergo unnecessary and unwanted medical exams. They also felt that women did not need the right to sell their body, but equal opportunities in education to obtain proper jobs and better pay. Women of the trade thought the regulations were too strict. Many prostitutes refused to pay fees and undergo examinations. They returned to their work in their usual manner, and half of them didn't bother to register in the first place. They still roamed the streets soliciting business. Of course, they would be arrested only to be returned to the streets and begin working again. Legal and patrolled brothels did not improve the tone of neighborhoods. Residents still complained of noise and bawdy behavior. In fact, people began to move out of areas with brothels, leaving vacant homes and properties. In one such case, Madame Vic DeBar was allowed to buy a property near St. Luke's Hospital at 6th and Elm. The trustees of the hospitals did not care for this at all and vacated the building and moved the hospital to a completely different part of the city. So one major opponent of this ordinance was William Greenleaf Eliot, the founder of Washington University. He believed that prostitution should not be regulated, but eradicated. He filed suit against Eliza Haycraft and Kate Clark, two of St. Louis's best-known madams. He claimed that they were breaking state law by operating brothels. So Police Chief McDonough arrested his neighbor and former prostitute, Fanny Canavan, for excessive noise coming from her house one night. He deemed her too drunk to be released and denied her proper bail. Canavan, in turn, charged the police chief with arbitrary and malicious arrest. Other protesters began voicing their complaints as well, stating that McDonough had done the same thing to them. So, McDonough was suspended for 30 days and eventually resigned in disgrace. In early March of 1874, 72 St. Louis attorneys petitioned the Missouri legislature to repeal the law. They claimed it gave too much power to the police department. They could raid houses at will and incarcerate for indifferent amounts of time without due process. The Board of Health was forcing gynecological exams upon women. In general, the law posed a threat to civil liberties. A bill was introduced to repeal the clause of the city's charter permitting regulation of prostitution. It passed with a 2/3 majority vote. On March 30th, 1874, the Missouri Supreme Court declared that St. Louis could no longer regulate prostitution and nullified the Social Evil Ordinance. Both the legislation bill and the court decision merely said the city could not regulate prostitution, but did not technically ban it altogether. So the city was back where it started. In 1879, prostitution within the city limits would be legally banned. The state legislator and Governor Charles Johnson were concerned about the environment within St. Louis. They worried that similar incidents, like Mr. McDonough occurred, would happen again. They feared the police would use evidence obtained in previous years to incriminate and arrest women in the future. They banned members of the police department from entering brothels without a warrant, and they could not extort money from women to ignore past wrongdoings. After the ordinance was nullified, the Social Evil Hospital was renamed the Female Hospital, with the mission to care for poor women and children of all backgrounds. No men were allowed to live on the property since they still treated women of ill repute. It remained in use in this capacity until 1910. It was then repurposed as a home for the elderly residents of the city's poorhouse. Side note on the female hospital: in 1906, Carrie McDonald gave birth to a baby girl, Frida Josephine McDonald, who would grow up to be Josephine Baker. In 1915, the building for the Social Evil Hospital was demolished to make way for Sublet Park. The Social Evil Ordinance attempted to bring order to a chaotic scene, but proved unsuccessful. For a brief moment, St. Louis was the center of attention for social do-gooders as the administration of the ordinance unfolded, but that was ultimately condemned for its execution. Thank you for joining me today. You can find me at our website at showmehistorystl.com and on Facebook at showmehistorystl. Until next time, I'll see you in the loo.